Oh, we just have to have some fun around here. If we're going to be talking about such a heavy topic, we had to have a little fun. And you know, it worked out well. For those of you who are back from the New Testament class, welcome back. I don't know how you were, you must be gluttons for punishment. I mean, you were with me for well over a year. Some of you have been here since the Old Testament. You must feel like you're the people of God wandering through the wilderness. But for those of you who are new, then welcome in. Glad that you are joining us. And for those of you online, welcome to you as well. We started talking about doing this class in the beginning of 2020. I started announcing this in the New Testament overview class that I taught, and I had anticipated doing it right after the New Testament class was over with. And then COVID happened, and we didn't meet for 6 months or so, and then we got back at it, and right as we ended the New Testament class, Fearless series began, and I did not want to do anything that would bring a conflict between the two groups, and so I decided to push it, and then I had a couple of other scheduling conflicts, and so here we are on October 28th, which, talking about cults, and as spooky as it is, it kind of works out well a few days before Halloween, exactly, so I meant no offense to anyone who is a part of one of these groups. We're going to talk about this tonight. The terminology that we use is important when we're talking about these groups. You will hear me say cults in this class because we're in a church and we can say what we want to say. But I would say that one of the aims of this class is to not only learn what these groups believe and what they practice, but how to talk with someone who is a part of one of these groups, how to witness or evangelize, kind of a scary word, but an important one, to someone who belongs to one of these groups. And I would say step number one is don't refer to their group as a cult, right? Because immediately you are going to lose the ability to speak into their life. They're going to be like, a cult? What do you mean? I have had this happen already, actually, just in making the post about this class. Some friends of Jessica from long ago, parents of a friend from long ago who are a part of the LDS group, the Latter-day Saints, both messaged me individually and told me they were going to be unfriending me because I lumped their group into this category. And I respectfully said, I'm sorry that you took offense to that. That wasn't my intention. However, when it comes to the Orthodox faith, the writings of the Mormon texts and we'll come to talk more about this in weeks to come, but one of the high-ranking Mormon members who writes a considerable amount of doctrine for them, all of these texts are not in line with what we believe the Bible teaches, and so I do have to lump them into that category because they fit the definition. That said, if I were given the opportunity to sit down and talk with them apart from this experience, I would never refer to their group as a cult. One, just out of respect. As believers, we're to respect all people, regardless of whether they agree with us or not. The book of Romans tells us, as far as it depends upon ourselves, we are to be at peace with all people. And so one of the ways we can do that is just by valuing our words and choosing words that are helpful and productive and not inflammatory, if we don't have to. Sometimes words are inflammatory regardless, and then we have to stand on truth. But if we can help it, I think respectful is always a good witness. So terminology matters. But why? Why study this? What is the biblical basis for this? I put down here in the very beginning, Colossians 2:8, the Apostle Paul says, to see to it that no one takes you captive through philosophy and empty deception, according to the tradition of men, according to the elementary principles of the world, rather than according to Christ. Paul says, see to it, pay attention to, make sure that, be determined that no one takes you captive in your mind, not men, not elemental principles of this world, which refers to not the physical realm, but the spiritual realm, namely demons or demonic deception, Make sure that nothing takes you captive, but that you stand in obedience to Christ. And so we are going to unpack over the next several weeks not only what is a cult, how do we define cults, how do they have staying power, how do they succeed, in other words. You know, it's a fascinating thing. We'll talk more about this tonight, but how do cults happen? I mean, it's kind of shocking when you think about it. How do these groups succeed? And then more specifically in the coming weeks, we will talk through a variety of modern cults and what they believe, what they practice, so on and so forth. Now, I do want to issue I don't know what the word is, an opportunity for you, maybe. I have a running list that I am choosing from, and I'm basing my choices of what we cover on what I feel like you will be most likely to encounter as a believer in Fort Worth, Texas, okay? So the LDS movement is in this list. Jehovah's Witnesses are in this list. But some of the other groups are going to be groups that we'll look at that I think are maybe a little more historical, that maybe you remember that had a height at one time, but are maybe not as well known today. The Branch Davidians, if you remember the Waco siege in the early 90s, Heaven's Gate, reaching a little bit back, Marshall Applewhite, and some of the bizarre things that happened in that group. But I wanted to put this out there that if you have somebody in your family, in your workplace, a friend, anyone that is a part of a group that you believe might be a cult, then come and talk with me. And what I will do is I will determine whether or not I think it fits the mold, and if it does, then we'll talk about it. Because the goal, again, is to equip you to not only understand what they believe, but how to discuss Jesus with them, how to present the gospel to them. And so if I can do that, if I can equip you better in a real-life scenario that you are not only likely but probably will encounter, then I would love to do that very, very much. In the back, Morgan, would you turn the music on the computer off? I think it's playing through one of the headsets back here. I don't know if y'all can hear that, but it's definitely, yeah, there you go. Yeah, maybe I am hearing things. Who knows? So I just want to put that out there. If you would like to talk with me after class, if you want to message me, email me, whatever is easiest for you, let me know. I'd be happy to look into that, and we will discuss. Let's see here. We're cranked up all the way. Sometimes YouTube is louder, but we can't chat. Volume is really low. I don't know if you can fix that, but the feed is saying that the volume is really low. Okay, so let's start. And let me also say this. Let me establish some ground rules. The ground rules are really pretty simple, that if you have a question, then raise your hand. I would love, this is not meant to just be, I am more than capable of sitting up here and talking for an hour, all right? You see me do it almost every Sunday. But if you have a question at any point over something that I say, when I get to a breaking point, so I'm not losing my train of thought, I will call on you. Feel free to ask questions. We were very interactive in the New Testament class. I love that. I want to know if I say something that you're like, I don't really understand what you meant by that, or if you want further information on that, then just raise your hand. We'll be very informal in here. What is a cult? When you think of a cult, let me ask this question. We'll get some interaction going here. When someone says the word cult, what comes to your mind? Brainwash. Okay? Okay. Flowers in the airport. The movies, right. The movies, okay. What else? The Moonies, yes. I was like, the movies are, right. Yes, the Moonies, okay, I'm with you. You think of Satan? Yeah? Someone over here? Charlie Manson, that's a big one, yeah. Jim Jones. The Watchtower, very big one, yeah. What was it? Don't drink. Okay, so let me pause. It was a dream of mine to provide you with Kool-Aid tonight. It was. I planned it. I went to Sam's Club even to try and find it. But I realized that in this COVID age, it really probably needed to be like individually juice boxes. and I couldn't find it at Sam's. And then I ran out of time to go to Walmart. I really, honestly, for a year, I've been thinking, man, when I do this cults class, everyone is going to have Kool-Aid. It's probably a little dark, but in my mind, it was funny. So, good. Anyone else? Yeah? Yeah? Did you have another one? Scientology. Okay. Yeah. Any others? So, I always think of robes. Anyone else? Just really, sacrifices, robes, torches, the really weird, and maybe that's just the movies that I have been exposed to as a younger person. Cults have always fascinated me, but I've learned that, like almost anything, when you ask a room full of people, what do you think of when you hear this word, you will get probably as many answers as there are people in the room. And what's interesting is everyone in the room will probably also nod in agreement with everything else everyone says. Because cults are such a wide-ranging topic, and they elicit a lot of different ideas and images and experiences. And so it is a very fascinating and broad topic. I'll give you a little bit of my background before we answer this question, what is a cult? Most of you have heard my story. Those of you who haven't, come talk to me. It's a little longer than what we have time for tonight. But one part of my story that I don't often talk about, because it was kind of a smaller portion in comparison to some of the larger life events that took place, I almost joined a cult twice. And when I say twice, I mean 2 different cults, not the same one, I didn't go back a second time. My dad's side of the family, I had some family members who were very involved in a cult called the Rosicrucian Order, and the Order of the Rose Cross. And Rosicrucianism is one that I intend on talking about in our group tonight. It is one that has a lot of problems. And when I was a young man, and by young I mean a boy, my grandparents spoke a great deal about it, about astral projecting and looking into the mirror with candles lit to see your former reincarnated self. And I'm talking weird stuff, right? Very culty things. And it turns out that as I became an adult and eventually a Christian, I learned that my grandparents were not only involved, but they were very involved. My granddad was one of the high priests of this group. In fact, if you, to this day, Google search the Rosicrucian Order, you can find a sort of beginner's guide pamphlet that they give to every new member, and you will find on the right column somewhere down the line a quote from my sweet little grandmother. They were very, very involved. Now, I will say the only thing that kept me from joining, apart from the obvious providence of God, was that as a 18, 19-year-old guy, I was really honestly just, I put things off. If it wasn't immediately in front of me, I wasn't super interested. And I had the order, and I was going to fill it all out and send my thing in, and then I just never sent it in. Lazy, procrastination, who knows? I was a young kid, didn't have a lot of discipline at that time in my life. Praise the Lord for that. After I met Jessica and we got engaged, one of her rules of engagement, see what I did there, was that we had to join a church. And Jessica grew up in the Church of Christ, which is, interestingly, apart from bad theology and a few other problems, not a cult. But the International Church of Christ, the ICOC, I would actually put in that category, and we may talk about that. If any of you have any the ICOC, International Church, okay, so maybe we will discuss that one then. Either way, I attended a few of the churches that she went to, her dad and her uncle, and they were horribly boring, and they didn't use any instruments. Me being a musician, that wasn't going to work for me. And so we began looking for somewhere else to go, and a buddy of mine in high school that I'd been friends with for a very long time was a part of this new church, and he was turning his life around, and he'd gotten married, and I was thinking, man, this guy has really got it together. His name was Chase, and I grew up with this guy, and so I thought, hey, why don't we go try Chase's church? So I called him, and I said, hey, we'd love to come in and check your church out. And he said, well, yeah, we'd love for you to come. And I said, so where is it? And he goes, well, we don't really meet in a building. That's one of the unique things about our church is we meet in the home. And I was like, well, that's kind of cool. Yeah, I mean, I like that, because in my mind, church equaled like not good, right? All the church people I knew, very judgmental, very bad, some abusive. So I had a really bad taste in my mouth for church at the beginning of this journey. But we went. It was at a home. It was a very weird experience. It was, I don't even really know how to describe it. I will describe it later because it's definitely one of the groups that we are going to discuss. They're a group called the Way International. The Way International, the best I could describe them is like a charismatic Jehovah's Witness group with no real estate. They're a very strange group, but either way, we both left there with some questions. Jessica was very freaked out. Growing up in the Church of Christ, it was not really her thing, and we had some friends that were involved here at this church, or their parents were at least, and so we got invited, and the Lord worked in our lives very powerfully, and we were born again within 2 or 3 weeks of being here. This was in 2007, and God redeemed me, and then I began this crazy journey, and told Jessica that I love Jesus, and I think I may be called to ministry at some level, but definitely not preaching. It's not my bag at all. Probably music ministry of some kind, and of course God has a sense of humor. But all that to say, twice we were being pulled into a really, really problematic group, and so I have always, since I've been an early believer, had a fascination with cults. It fascinates me that someone can have such control over a large group of people to the extent that certain cults have had. And it fascinates me that they're able to survive, and especially in the modern world where everyone is so inquisitive and everyone questions everything and there's such skepticism. It amazes me that they are still a thing, and yet they are. And so my experience with them and my interest in them have led me to finally do this. It's something I've wanted to do for a long time. How do we define a cult? Let's look. We're going to have characteristics here at the bottom of the page. If you have questions at any time, then just stop me. I'd be happy to answer them. There are 7 characteristics, more or less, that we're going to talk about here. Now, there may be more, but I think when you think about the scholarly world, cult scholars, and there are such things, would agree pretty much for the most part that these 7 characteristics are important characteristics that fall into almost every cult group. The first one is that they will all have a modern-day living prophet called by God. They will all have this. This is an important facet of a cult, a modern-day living prophet called by God. What does that mean? Modern day, they're contemporary. They are in our time. They're not someone from 2,000 years ago. They're not someone from 500 years ago. They're alive right now. They could call you on the phone. In fact, they probably have called you on the phone if you are a part of their group. They are called by God, meaning that they have special assignment and authority from God Himself. So how could they possibly say no? And how can you possibly say no? Because if you say no to them, you're saying no to God. See? And they're a prophet, meaning they speak on behalf of Him. So you will not hear from God most of the time. You will hear from His mouthpiece, the modern-day living prophet. They are usually very intelligent individuals, very, very intelligent people. They usually have thought rigorously about the system that they have created, sometimes knowingly, sometimes unknowingly. I would submit to you that some cult leaders, I think, from the very beginning have had an idea or a blueprint of what they wanted to do. Sometimes I think cult leaders, in fact, I would say oftentimes cult leaders believe they are a living prophet called by God. They are delusional. They have been deceived, as we read in Colossians chapter 2, verse 8. So they are usually very intelligent. They're usually very charismatic. They can talk. They can get you, right? They have a lot of great personable ability. They wow the crowd. Someone mentioned Jim Jones. And we will talk about that group. Jim Jones was a charismatic preacher before he began the People's Temple. He was someone that he was an incredible orator. A lot of people followed him because he spoke very, very well. He was very intelligent. He was very charismatic. Usually, they're also just flat out crazy, right? Like they're just like there's no other way for it. They're just crazy people, like probably sociopathic. That usually when you have high IQ, high charismatic output, generally speaking, you're going to see a little bit of craze as well. They're on the border, and if they go over the border, then they're kind of there's no coming back. These are, by definition, what the Bible would call antichrists, plural. So that may seem as a shock to some of you. There was only one antichrist. No, there are many antichrists. And if you have your Bible, great, I will read from it. I always tell you to bring it and read it with me just so you can see I'm not making it up. But I will nevertheless read this. This is 1 John chapter 2, verse 18. John says, "Children, it is the last hour, and as you have heard, that Antichrist is coming." You're like, well, what's the deal? That's singular. "So now many antichrists have come," plural. "Therefore we know that it is the last hour. They went out from us, but they were not of us. For if they had been of us, they would have continued with us, but they went out that it may become plain that they are all not of us." He's going to go on to say that the Antichrist is anyone who denies that Jesus Christ is the Son of the living God. And by that, I mean the Jesus Christ as presented in the whole New Testament and only the New Testament. That's an important distinction because, as you are aware, some of the groups we're going to talk about believe in a Jesus. But I would submit to you, it's not the Jesus of the Bible. It's a very different Jesus, a very different version of Jesus that is not biblical. The Branch Davidians. So this is an interesting thing about the living prophet called by God. If you were around, how many of you were around in Texas in the 90s for? Yeah, so you remember. I was young. I was a little boy, but I remember watching the live coverage on the news when the siege happened. It was an important moment in my family's life because my mom's side of the family, many of them live in Riesel, Texas, which is right outside of Waco. And so we went to Waco every Thanksgiving to see that part of the family. And that part of my family knew some of the Branch Davidians that were a part of that group. So they were very connected. This was a very personal thing for them. Some of their, I wouldn't say friends, but people that they knew from kids going to school and so on and so forth died in that siege. Really, a really tragic event that took place there. I will say this, and we'll talk about this when we cover this group. David Koresh was the so-called living prophet called by God. In fact, he claimed to be the Son of God, reincarnate, which I always thought was kind of hilarious because he had these like Coke bottle glasses and like perfect Son of God and that kind of eyesight. Doesn't seem right to me, but they were actually an offshoot of the Branch Davidian movement. This is an important distinction to make. In fact, Branch Davidians call that movement Koreshians because they followed this guy who was disfellowshipped from the Branch Davidian movement. Now, let me just clarify, Branch Davidians still have some massive theological error, okay? But Koresh was a sect even of this cultish group known as the Branch Davidians. That's an important distinction to make, and it highlights something that I'm going to come back to several times throughout this class, which is when we talk about cult groups, it's important that we get the information right. And what I mean by that is, I had a professor tell me once that when you are teaching a group of people what a cult believes, you should be able to do so in such a way where if a member of that group were in the audience, they would go, yeah, that's mostly what we believe. Now, maybe you get the terminology wrong a little bit, right? Maybe you say some things a little weird or you use certain words a little differently, but by and large, you should be able to speak about these groups in such a way where someone who adheres to that group would go, yeah, you're not wrong. That is actually what we believe. Now, that's important, isn't it? Because it's not uncommon in evangelicalism for preachers to talk about these groups as caricatures of who they really are. And what that does is it discredits us right from the outset because an adherent to that group goes, he doesn't even know what he's talking about. That's not what he believes. That's not what we believe. We're not, he can't call us a cult because he hadn't even gotten us right. So Mormons, great example, right? What's the first thing that everyone goes to when they talk about Mormons? Right? Multiple wives, right? The polygamy. Hadn't been a thing in over 100 years. Now the FLDS movement practices polygamy, and they have their separate living prophet apart from the LDS church, Warren Jeffs, who you're probably, again, aware of, been in the news in the last decade or so. He is still currently their living prophet, even from prison. He is the living prophet of the FLDS movement. I've got a great story about him in a little while that will really bless your soul. All that to say, again, it's important, and it's a matter of respect, I feel like, for other people and their beliefs. We need to know what they believe and rightly be able to describe them if we're going to have a chance at communicating truth to them. Because if we let out right out of the outset that, man, we don't really understand what they think, or we've got this caricature of them, they're going to tune us out real quickly. And then it kind of discredits the message. So, living prophet called by God. Any questions on that one? All right, number 2. They have a special message from God not included in the Bible. Okay? A special message from God not included in the Bible. There's a couple ways that this can work out. It can be that they have extra books in addition to the Bible that helps present this special message that they have been given by God. Okay, so again, LDS, they do believe in the Bible, they do teach the Bible, but what they teach is that there were aspects of the Bible that were compromised and or removed when the last living apostle died, and that Joseph Smith received revelation to bring the full gospel back into its right position, and that was done in 3 other sacred texts that they read: the Book of Mormon, which is the most common one that most people know about, the Doctrine and Covenants, and the Pearl of Great Price. Now, there are also writings, as I mentioned a little while ago, from some of their higher-ups. One of the apostles of the Quorum, James Talmage, has written a great deal that forms Mormon thought. And all of these writings present some major issues when we hold them up to the Bible. Okay? And so this is one of the reasons why we fit that group into this category, because they have a special message from God not included in the Bible. Now, what about like the Jehovah's Witnesses? They don't have an extra Bible or an extra book or an extra sacred text. What do they have? A translation. Yes. They have a specific translation. Anyone know what it's called? No? The New World. The New World Translation. Now, the King James Version, it's got its issues, but it's a good translation. It's just hard to read. Update thyself if you have that version. Yes, the New World Translation is the Jehovah's Witness translation, and they have taken some radical approaches to removing particular doctrines that fit what they teach. So one of the things that Jehovah's Witnesses deny is the deity of Christ. They actually fundamentally reject the Trinity. And what you're going to find in most of these Christian cult groups is that most of their problems have to do with the Trinity. I'll say that from the outset. Most of them, their doctrine rejects Trinitarian theology. So in the New World Translation, for example, in John chapter 1, verse 1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. That's what our translations indicate. Literally translated, and God was the Word, actually, is how it reads. They have gone to retranslate that for it to say, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was a God, a lowercase g God. Not actually God, just like a Superman, right? Now that sounds silly, but it's kind of actually what they think. Yeah? Yes. On a stake. Yes. Yeah, there is nothing in their translation that uses the word cross, which again is insane to me that they even try and make that argument. And we'll talk a little bit more on Jehovah's Witnesses when we get to that. But crucifixion wasn't invented by the Bible. I hope you know that. Trust you know that. It was invented actually by the Persians well before the Roman Empire developed, and the Roman Empire just sort of perfected it. They did it a lot. They got a lot of practice in. Yeah, they reject that. They reject a lot of things. What's interesting is the basis for their translation there is that there's no article in that passage, the. And so they don't take that to mean the God. They take it to mean a God. But there's no article there because it's already at the beginning of the sentence to establish who we're talking about. And so modern and ancient, since Jehovah's Witnesses have been around, grammarians all pretty much agree that it's one of the worst translations out there. Now, what's sad about it is actually the rest of their Bible there's some really great translations in there. Linguistically, they do some things that are really great. They just miss on like the major, fundamental, important parts. I actually, for a long time, made it a practice when I would go to half-price books to buy the New World translations when I would find them, and then promptly throw them in the trash. So, rid the world of bad doctrine. The Way International is another example of how a special message from God, not included in the Bible, might be demonstrated. The Way International does not have their own translation. They do not have extra books of the Bible. They only have the Bible. But again, what I mean by this is you cannot open the Bible and plainly read it with good, sound hermeneutics and come away with what this group teaches. There has to be a living prophet that said, no, that's actually not what it means. That's not what it means, yeah. Anytime that happens, there are some issues here, okay? So a prophet called by God, living prophet called by God, special message from God, not included in the Bible. Number 3, there's usually an apocalyptic message to these groups. In other words, the world is ending, so join our group. Now, again, Christianity has an apocalyptic message. We spent 6 weeks at the end of my New Testament class talking about Revelation and the apocalyptic nature of our future, our present and our future. This is, again, not necessarily a bad thing, but it's typically pretty common in these groups. Heaven's Gate, I mentioned them a little while ago. If you remember Marshall Applewhite, they were the ones that believed in this strange thing, the Hale-Bopp comet. If you remember that, the Hale-Bopp comet was going to pass over Earth at a particular time, and they committed mass suicide together, believing that their spirits would go up to Hale-Bopp, onto this comet, and fly to the next stage of life, leaving this world behind. In fact, I actually quoted it here. This was on their website. It says, Hale-Bopp brings closure to Heaven's Gate. Our 22 years of classroom here on planet Earth is finally coming to conclusion. Graduation from the human evolutionary level. We are happily prepared to leave this world and go with T's crew. Interesting fact about Heaven's Gate, they all committed suicide with the exception of one person. It wasn't the leader, actually. It wasn't the leader. The leader was crazy enough to go along with it. It was one guy that they have continued to keep around to maintain their website. I'm dead serious. Now, here's what's crazy about it, is it looks exactly like it looked in the 90s when they all died. He's never updated so it's running off of like the most elementary version of HTML that you can run. It looks awful. It looks literally like you went back 25, 30 years and got on the internet. It is strange. Yeah, and you can still actually ask questions on their website and get the response from this one guy. One guy, yeah. Creepy. Creepy, creepy. Any questions so far? Probably a lot of them, but we'll answer most of them, hopefully. Number 4, there is usually authoritarian leadership. There's usually authoritarian leadership. So usually there's a very strict chain of command, and no one questions the living prophet. No one questions the living prophet, and no one questions the people under the living prophet who have dictated what he wants to have happen, because if you question the system, you are seen as a threat, and typically you are removed pretty early on and shunned, excommunicated and shunned. Shunning is a major practice of cults. Any major cult will also typically have now a website of ex-cult members who share their crazy stories about how they blew the whistle on some weird thing that was going on and then were ultimately shunned, sometimes even by their family members. Authoritarian leadership is a big part of the structure of cults. Number 5, they are very exclusive. Very exclusive. You will not find many open-minded cults, right? Not a lot of cult members with coexist stickers on their bumpers. If you catch what I'm like, we are right and you are all wrong. Now, again, isn't this? I mean, if we're being honest, this is the claim of most religions. If you know, even people who believe in many ways to get to heaven, if you go and join one of their congregations and you insist that only one way is the way to get to heaven, how quickly are you removed for not believing that all ways lead to heaven? See, inclusive groups, so-called inclusive groups, are just as exclusive at their core as any other religion. That's sort of a misnomer. Groups that believe that there are multiple ways, you're only welcome if you also believe there are multiple ways. If you insist that only one of those ways is right, you're going to be removed. You're not going to last long there. Very exclusive. Number 6, typically a very legalistic lifestyle. So cults will generally have incredibly rigid rules of do this and do not do that. So for example, again, the LDS, there are certain things that they cannot drink. Interestingly enough, caffeine is not one of them. And sodas is not one of them. I was led to believe for many, many years that Mormons could not have them, and I think that's actually more of a southern thing. But Salt Lake City Mormons, which are like the true Mormons, they have, in fact, there was a couple years ago at Brigham Young, they had Coke products finally hit their cafeteria, and they were like rejoicing over this because they didn't have them prior to that. They're not allowed to have coffee, which I'm like immediately out on. Would have never been a Mormon, but they cannot have that. They have religious garments typically. We'll talk about those. There are temple garments, if you will. Again, this is one of those things that some evangelicals like to kind of poke fun of. I just don't see that that's very helpful when talking about these groups. It is something that matters to these people, and again, if you're going to have an in with them, respect is a good thing. Jehovah's Witnesses also have a very set of strange and rigid rules. So they don't celebrate birthdays. Anyone want to know why? Okay, so there is one birthday party in the Bible. Anyone remember what it was? Herod. And what did Herod want for his birthday? Well, no, it wasn't that. He wanted a lap dance from the woman's daughter. You think I'm making this up? I'm not. She wanted John the Baptist's head on a platter, and so in order to get the lap dance, that's what he does. He cuts John the Baptist's head off and kills him. So Jehovah's Witnesses go, well, there's only one birthday in the Bible, and someone dies. So that must mean that God doesn't want us to celebrate birthday parties. A little bit of a stretch is all I'm saying. A little bit of a stretch. They also do not celebrate holidays of any kind. And there's something else they don't do that's very rigid, but I'm not going to talk about it yet because we're going to get to it here in a moment in this next portion. And finally, number 7, there is a persecution mentality in most cults. So the more they are persecuted, the more they are convinced they are right. LDS member comes and knocks on your door and says, hey, would you like to hear about a special message of Jesus Christ not included in your Bible? And you slam the door on their face, which, by the way, don't do that, be respectful to them. But slam the door in their face, they're going to go, see, we're persecuted. We must be right. Because the Bible says we're going to be persecuted. See how that works? This is easy for church or for cult leaders. The more persecution, the more you get looked at weird, the more you get fingers pointed at you, the more people remove you from social gatherings and put weird labels on you. Well, brother, that's just because the Lord is trying you and testing you because you're on the path of righteousness. Ooh, rough. 7 characteristics. Now, I've mentioned it on a couple of them, but I'm going to just outright say it. Could we not apply all of these things to Christianity? Right? I mean, is that a safe assessment? A living prophet? And we believe that Jesus is alive. He's called by God. He's the Son of God. He has a special message that wasn't included in the Old Testament because we have the New Covenant, the New Testament now. An apocalyptic message, right? Revelation, authoritarian leadership. I am the way, right? Exclusive. I am the way. No one comes to the Father except through me. Legalistic lifestyle. James, the book of James is filled with live this way, don't live that way. Persecution mentality. How much do they hate me and how much more will they hate you who follow me? Interestingly enough, history tells us that the Jewish people actually looked at earliest versions of Christianity as a cult, as a Jewish cult. This is how they were viewed by the Roman Empire. They're a weird, offset sect of Jewish cult members. The only difference is we're right. So it spread like wildfire. We're considered one of the world religions today. And that brings up another discussion. When does a group move from a cult or a new religious movement to a world religion? Some would argue that it has to do with numbers. Some have differing ideas on that. Christianity is roughly 1 billion people in the world who adhere to the Christian faith. Now, I would argue that that number is probably a bit misleading. Don't think it's probably that high. A lot of people who say they're Christians in a lot of surveys and whatnot that are almost certainly not. Islam, around 1 billion people as well. Hinduism, around 500 to 700,000. Buddhism, 500 to 700,000. Judaism, not 500 to 7,000, I'm sorry, 500 to 700 million. Judaism is only around 200 million. It's very low, actually, one of the lower ones. In fact, Mormons, they're saying, what is his name? Stark. Professor Stark, I think is his name. Correct me if I'm wrong. He's at Baylor, if any of you are Baylor people. He's a sociologist there and a professor of world religions. He predicts that Mormonism will become the 6th world religion before too long. They are growing at a very rapid rate. Jehovah's Witnesses, on the other hand, are very small in comparison. So it's hard to say. At what point does a cult or an offset group become an actual established world religion? There's some varying ideas on that. And for what it's worth, I don't know that Mormonism will become a world religion. I don't think, not for a very long time. When you consider the other groups that are on that list, every one of them are very old. Very, very old. Centuries, millennia old. Mormonism was founded roughly 150, 200 years ago. So, some problems there. Not yet. Any questions on these characteristics? Yeah. Yeah. Sure. I think world religion seems to carry a little bit more normality, acceptability to it. And so I think the idea behind what Stark at Baylor is getting at is that if Mormonism continues to grow at the rate that it's growing, then how soon will people start going, maybe it's not a cult, because it's bigger than Judaism. And exactly. So that's the other thing that I would warn you about is that I think Christians sometimes can get nervous when we talk about these kinds of numbers. Like, we want to be number one. It's a good thing that we have 1 billion and they only have 500 to 700 million. Islam is really giving us a run for their money right now. They're at 1 billion as well. I mean, the reality is, like Jesus tells us, that the gate is narrow. I don't think we need to be that concerned about having the biggest number. In fact, I think if we have the biggest number, we're maybe doing something wrong to some extent. Which is why, again, I would challenge that number. I don't think that it's nearly 1 billion people if you were to consider born-again, actual Christians. Yes? Catholicism, no, they are not anymore. The question for those of you online is what about Catholicism? Do they fall into this number one category? Not anymore. And people ask me about Catholicism, is it considered a cult? And that's a good question. Because certainly it has a lot of these characteristics, right? In fact, you could almost argue all of them. Special message from God, not included in the Bible. I mean, there are some things in Catholic doctrine that are not in the Bible. The living prophet, the Pope, had to say something in order for it to become established doctrine of the church. But what did I say that living prophet was typically typified as? Contemporary, charismatic, need I say more? I'm just being honest, like the Pope is not winning many people to Catholicism. They're not like, you would never believe who I heard speak today. Like, does the man even talk? Right? I mean, no. So it's like, here's the thing with this, okay? The 7 characteristics, they're characteristics. It's not a science. You may find groups, I was talking with Kathy beforehand about the Amish. The Mennonites are another one, which, they kind of fall into very similar categories. They seem very cult-like. And you can look at their characteristics and their practices and look at these things on this paper and go like, man, but there's kind of a smell test to cults. You know what I mean? Like, at the end of the day, as Christians, we have the Holy Spirit who gives us discernment. And so there's something in us, I think, when I think about Catholicism, I'm like, yeah, they're just not very culty to me. When I think about Mormons, I'm like, yeah, there's something very culty going on here. And I don't know how else to describe that. It's not really a science. There's a lot of reasonings, very productive, tangible reasons that I have for why I would say that. But at the end of the day, there is this ministry of the Holy Spirit that Christians have that helps us understand and identify what a group is and what it isn't. And there's sort of a smell test, right? If it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's probably a cult, right? So that's kind of the idea behind this. It's not a science. I don't want you talking to your aunt like, Aunt Sally, I'm sorry, but all 7 characteristics are in your group. I think you're in a new religious movement. Like, don't do that, all right? It may not be the case. It may not be the case. Any other questions, comments, concerns before we keep going? Where are we at on time? 7:35. We're doing great. Nothing? All right. How do cults have lasting power? This is another question that we need to figure out. In other words, like, what makes them succeed? How do they last? These are crazy, the beginnings of some of these groups, as you're going to find out, the history of some of these groups, they're nuts. How did it happen? How did it work? How did they last all these years? One of the things that makes a cult successful is they appear normal to other people. That's one of the goals, to appear normal. Real fast, let me just say, because I'm not in the habit of looking at this, let me make sure that I'm not missing something, because I did see one. Sierra asked, don't Mormons consider themselves Christians, though, because they're Christ believers? So yes, you will talk with some Mormons who will say, well, we're Christians too, because we believe in Jesus. But I think by very definition that they call themselves Mormons is indicative enough. It's kind of like Catholics. Like, well, why do you call yourself a Catholic then? Why aren't you just a Christian? Well, because Christian means like just the Bible, and we believe more than that. Okay, well then, right? So our definition of Christian is different between us and Mormons. And let me also just say, as a side note, that I do believe there is a massive difference theologically between Catholics and Mormons. So hear me when I say that. I do believe that there are people who are quote-unquote Roman Catholic who are born again and will go to heaven when they die. I absolutely am convinced of that. Now, if you are following letter by letter the doctrine of the Vatican, I don't think you can. I don't think you can be a born-again believer. But most Catholics are not. Most Catholics have no idea what the Vatican actually teaches. They just believe kind of the basic ideas of Christianity. Mormons, it's a much different discussion to have, because to be a Mormon, again, means to adopt not the Bible, but particularly the Book of Mormon, the Doctrine and Covenants, and the Pearl of Great Price, which are going to issue you something that is fundamentally different than the gospel. We believe that the Bible teaches that the gospel is good news, that though we were not capable of doing anything to bring about salvation in our life, God acted on our behalf. That is not the doctrine of the LDS Church. Now, they will say things like, well, yeah, we believe that salvation is by faith. But again, how do you define faith? Faith is expressed through the working out of a variety of works. And any person who is being honest about this, that is involved in the Mormon Church, will tell you that. Any of you here, it's been 7 or 8 years ago now, for Adams Road, the concert that we had in here with the Brittany, you must have been like 18 when we had that. That was like right when you first came, I think. Ann was here. Adams Road was if I could get them, maybe I need to reach out to them. I wonder if they're doing concerts. That would be really awesome to have them on a Wednesday night, like a concert. They're a band, and they play worship music that they've written. They are all former Mormon missionaries. And their story, their testimony of how they came to true saving faith is nothing shy of miraculous. It is one of the most unbelievable stories. I will not make any promises, but I will reach out to them and see, because they are based out of Florida, but they do travel a lot, and that would be really cool to have them back here and have, I would say like, well, COVID and the concert and all that, but you won't know any of their songs. They're all originals, and they won't draw a huge crowd because they're not like a big band. They're more of a ministry to people who are coming out of Mormonism. Yeah. Adams Road. Yeah. I will also say to you, and again, I'm not going to make any promises because COVID has changed a lot of things, but my plan, say this up front, when we get to the LDS talk, which will not be the first one we talk about. I'm going to push it to second or third in line so that I can make sure I secure enough time for this. I had gotten the green light before COVID, and assuming nothing has changed, I plan on having Dr. Travis Kearns here on one of the nights, who is the professor of the occult at Southwestern Seminary. He wrote his dissertation on Mormon theology. He actually ministered in Salt Lake for about 6 years. He's an incredible guy. You guys will absolutely love him if we can get him here. He's extremely funny and entertaining, but also a formidable voice when it comes to encountering Mormon theology. That whole thing I've been kind of reiterating about respect, he has been invited 3 times now to symposiums at Brigham Young University to speak about diversity of beliefs between evangelicals and Mormons. He's very respected amongst the Mormon community. We actually had on a Zoom call one of the apostles of the Mormon Church come on and speak about LDS doctrine in that class. He's got a lot of really incredible connections with these people. He's very respected. At the end of the day, he will tell you, I don't believe they're Christians. And so they have some issues with their theological differences, but they do it respectfully. And I am hoping, they're barring no changes in protocol for him. I don't know what Southwestern is putting on the professors right now. I know that there are some guidelines as to like where they can go and not go because they're trying to protect themselves and whatnot. But if I can get him here, you will be blessed. It will be a remarkable. You will learn way more than you can write down. The guy is just an incredible force to be reckoned with. So, and he also knows Adams Road. So maybe when I talk with him, I'll say, hey, call them and get them here, man, and we'll make a night of it. It'll be a lot of fun. Any other questions before we jump into this next part? Yeah. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, so online, guys, the question is about Pentecostals. They believe that they are the only ones that are right and that they get it, right, and everyone. They're very legalistic about their dress and whatnot. While I think that they would obviously say that they're right about the spiritual gifts in particular, they do not have anything that is fundamentally wrong theologically, unless we're talking about oneness Pentecostalism, which is, again, a sect of Pentecostalism, and I won't go into that tonight because it'll just be confusing for you, but I do not believe that they are a cult. They are a denomination. They have some differences. I mean, again, we as Southern Baptists believe that we are right theologically, right? And yet I would say that well, I don't know that I even think that. Southern Baptists get some things wrong. But we would say certainly that our Pentecostal brothers and sisters, our Assemblies of God brothers and sisters, those are not things that are preventing them from heaven, right? It's fundamental belief in the gospel that matters. And then the rest of the sort of practices and church structure and spiritual gifts, those are things that we can agree to disagree on. I think my position is right, otherwise I wouldn't teach and believe it. They think theirs is. And so, yeah. Another question? Yeah. Okay. I mean, I would take issue with that, but again, I don't know that makes them a cult. If you follow me, yeah. Yep. Sure. Yeah, so again, this is the difficulty. So online, again, the question is regarding, kind of these offshoot people online who are Pentecostals who proclaim to be prophets and God told me this. This is the thing that we got to be careful with. You're going to find this on Daystar, right? Like a prophet called by God with a message, The issue is what is the content of the message? Right? So if it's like, hey, I feel like I'm a prophet and I feel like God is calling me to tell you all this, or God is telling me to deliver this message, okay, I still would take some issue with that for theological issues, but that's not really what we're getting at with this. Where the problem becomes is, I had a dream and Peter and Jesus and the Father were standing at the gate and said, finally, Derrick, you've arrived. We can begin the last times. Right? Major red flags at that point, okay? That's what I mean by a special message. I don't necessarily mean like God just told me to tell you this. Again, I've written on my website about what I think about prophetic ministry. It will probably shock you actually because it's not the typical Southern Baptist approach to it. I do not think that is what typifies a cult, but it's more in line with the world has been waiting for your birth to usher in this final message before I end the world. Very different, very scary altogether. Yeah, in the back. Okay, yes. So in the back, the question is there sometimes a sexual component to some of these cults? Yes, there is. And we will talk about that. I'm trying to decide if I should go into some of this tonight. We've got a little bit of time. So the third highest populace for homosexuality in the United States is Salt Lake City, Utah. That's kind of shocking. There is a dark underbelly of Salt Lake City, a very dark underbelly. And people who have lived there, Dr. Kearns being one of them, will tell you there are some things going on there sexually. Now, this is wound up in, again, the theology of the belief. There is a sexual component that happens theologically. In short, and I'll go into more detail of this, I don't want to say too little and then say the wrong thing or leave you with the wrong idea, so make sure you come back for the Mormon talk. But the Mormon belief is that there are already millions of baby spirits in heaven, and that when people procreate, the child that is born is birth, and the spirit baby attaches itself to the body, and this is how a person becomes a person. So the more there's some whole level of rewards that happen spiritually, and I won't go into that tonight, but basically there's great incentive for women to give birth as much as possible. This is why Mormon families have like 19 kids, and they all play piano. I haven't figured that one out yet. I haven't figured it out. I'm certain there's something here, though. Every single Mormon I know plays piano. I don't know what that, but I can tell you what it's about, actually. There's a book that I would highly recommend. It's called Out of Mormonism. It's by Judy something or another. I'll bring it next time and show it to you guys. It is her firsthand account of her journey into Mormonism and then subsequently out of it. And the thing that drew her in, the thing that draws in a large number of people, is their emphasis on the family. They are in fact, they have fewer televisions in their home. They have a room in Salt Lake, the homes, the way they're designed, there's a front room, kind of a living space, but not the living room. I can't remember the name of it right now. There's typically a piano in there. They play hymns, they sing hymns together, they do Bible teaching together. It is a huge emphasis in Mormonism. It's one of the things that, honestly, I think evangelicalism could look at and take some notes on. They are huge when it comes to the family. They're huge when it comes to having children, and there are some theological rewards that come along with that. So yes, sex is a very big part of it. That's one way it shows itself. On the other side, and we'll get to it in a minute, the FLDS group, there's some really twisted stuff in there. When you look at the history of Joseph Smith and the number of wives that he had versus the number of children he had, you figure out pretty quickly that the foundation of this theology is driven not by a conviction from the Bible, but just the fact that I think he was probably a sex addict. And I know that's a strong claim, but I'll prove it when we get to that point. Let's talk about how they appear normal. I want to try to get through some of this. How does a group appear normal? Because if they can appear normal, then certainly they'll have some staying power in a society. When you join a group of any kind, there's a particular level of social capital that you have to spend in order to be a part of that group. If you join the church, for example, here at City on a Hill, and you come on Sunday mornings, perhaps you're in a Bible study, so you come for both the 9 and the 10:30. Maybe you serve in one of these ministries. Maybe you have bought a shirt that you wear occasionally. Maybe you have a coffee mug. These are little ventures that you have to spend some social capital on in order to be a part of what we're doing. When someone says, hey, you want to get brunch at 10 o'clock on Sunday? You're forced to either say yes and not come to church, or say, I would love to, but I go to church at that time. You've just spent social capital. If the cause is high enough, then you'll pay the social capital to be a part of it. Or if the social capital is low enough, you'll pay it because it's not that big of a deal. But if I were to say, guys, we're going to have a lot of fun over this next 15 weeks in my Colts class. I am going to actually require one thing, though, that you wear a pink clown mask every Tuesday for 10 hours. Can we agree to do that, and then you can be in this class? Y'all are like, no. I'll read the books, and I'll get because the social capital's too high. So there is capital that you have to spend in each of these groups, and the more you can normalize that capital, the more successful your group will be. Here's how it happens. Number one, a group will be seen as normal if a secular group deems them normal. So how does this happen? I've given it to you on the paper, so it's not like you're really having to guess. Yeah, the big one is the IRS. So in America, if you are a religious group and you apply for a nonprofit status, a 501c3, then C3, then you are able to be deemed normal to some extent by the United States government. So people will be like, well, I don't know, he's in that really weird group, but they've got nonprofit status. The U.S. government recognizes them as normal, so they can't be that weird, right? This is a big one. Scientology has been fighting this for a long time. They are on the brink of, in fact, it's kind of a complicated mess that I won't go into tonight with them. The Mormon Church has actually been fighting this one. About 5 years ago, they built the City Creek Center It's an outdoor mall in Salt Lake City, Utah, one of the most beautiful, incredible architectural wonders of a mall that you will ever see. It has a retractable roof. It's an outdoor mall, but it has a retractable roof when the weather gets bad. It's unbelievable. They spent, $5 billion with a B dollars to build it. So the LA Rams just recently built their new stadium, and I think it was $6 billion, and that was like mind-blowing. The Mormon Church built a mall for almost that much. So, of course, when we start talking about nonprofits and all that, and the government comes in and says, well, you just built a $5 billion mall, can't be that nonprofit, and that raises some questions. Apple has a store in this mall that they pay rent every month directly to the Latter-day Saints Church. Now, this is, of course, done through corporations that they have raised up to sort of shelter. There's a lot of legal stuff that goes on there to protect them. But this is one of the issues they're currently facing. In fact, not that long ago, a whistleblower from within the Mormon Church that has since left the Mormon Church leaked some information that he had on a thumb drive regarding some IRS tax documents that they turned in some time ago, not that long ago, that shows that they have conservatively the largest cash reserve in the entire world right now. Conservatively, $100 billion in cash. They have more money than the Vatican. They have more money than Apple, than Microsoft. Think about that for a minute. So when you go to the store and they're all out of change, blame the Mormon Church is all I'm saying. Don't do that. Don't do that. That's not what I'm saying. In some countries, apart from the United States, it works a little differently. It's not the IRS or a revenue service, but like, for example, in China, if you were to come up with a new religious group, the government has to approve that group in order for it to be legal for you to attend any of their gatherings. This is the issue, of course, with evangelicalism. It is not legal in China, and yet it's one of the fastest growing, in fact, it is the fastest growing portion of the Christian church in the entire world. So, does it really matter? Not really. Does it make you seem more normal? Almost certainly. Number two, a group will be seen as normal if their members serve or comply in the military. Now, that's an interesting one. I mentioned a moment ago when we talked about legalistic living, Jehovah's Witnesses they don't do birthdays, they don't do holidays. This is the other thing that I was referencing. They don't allow you to serve in the military. Why? Because it's too patriotic. And you don't have allegiance to anything but Jehovah. So people go, well, what's wrong with being patriotic? I mean, what else do you not like? You don't like apple pie? You don't like bass boats? You don't like Jesus? Right? See how fat? You don't like puppy dogs? What are you guys? Who are you people? Right? It's very weird. It's very weird. It raises questions. It's too much social capital. I'm not willing to pay that, to be in that. But this is what they require. 1952, prior to 1952, I should say, Mormons were actually considered very socially strange as well, similar to some of these other fringe groups. Very, very strange. And then in 1952, the tide turned tremendously. Anyone want to guess why? That's okay. I mean, I didn't guess why either. Say again? Yeah, Brigham Young beat Notre Dame. I don't know that would make them more normal. Probably more annoyed with them. So in 1952, this is when the majority of people serving the military came home from World War II. And what began happening is they were having picnics and gatherings in their backyards, and they'd say, hey, I hope you guys don't mind, but I invited Brad along and his family. And they go, well, wait a minute, isn't he a Mormon? Yeah, no, but he's fine. I served with him overseas, and man, he's great. We had burgers together, and man, he had my back all the time. They're perfectly fine. And then all of a sudden, Brad's Mormon family, he's not really a Mormon, is invited in, and the social temperature went down a little bit. Because all of a sudden they seem, okay, they're fine. Yeah, he served overseas. He loves America, so he must be Christian. Number three, a group will be seen as normal. Yeah. So say that again. Quakers and what was that? Right. So, so online, guys, she's asking, how do other groups like Quakers and people who have been historically a part of the American fabric, who also do not serve in the military, how have they been allowed to be sort of seen as normal, and yet a group like the Mormons have not? That is your question? So I'm guessing here, but they've been around a lot longer, one. And I mean, time grants staying power. If you're a group that's 10 years old, people are going to be like, okay, come back in 1,000 years. If you come back in 1,000 years, there's some legitimacy all of a sudden to what you've been doing, because you've been able to maintain whatever it is you're doing for a really long period of time. Not to mention that there were people in the, like you said, foundation of the United States who were a part of these groups. So again, maybe you're not a part of the military, but you have roots in the foundation of building this great nation. 3, America's temperature towards patriotism, if you will, has changed through the years. And so what looked patriotic and safe and normal 200 years ago looked different 60 years ago, 70 years ago, looks very different today, right? So I think there's a variety of sociological issues at play there probably, but I would say probably more than anything, it's a time thing. There is some staying power with time, familiarity. Does that sufficiently answer that? Okay, good. Number 3, a group will be seen as normal if they abandon claims to solve common medical problems. Now, this seems like duh, right? But, again, it's more prevalent than you would imagine. Now, hear me when I say this. What I'm not talking about is abandoned belief that God can heal you, okay? We believe that. Not that he always does, but we believe God can heal. We believe we should pray for healing. And then we believe that God's sovereignty will determine what God does, because God is God and we are not. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is the rejection of medical advice because of your theology. Not only that you should not go to a doctor, but that you cannot go to a doctor. So certain groups, the Way International being one of them, have massive dental problems because they never go to the dentist. It's against their belief system. Christian Science, which is ironically neither Christian nor scientific, they reject things like pain and evil. So they are illusions. All matter is an illusion. So you cannot actually feel pain. Okay, well, that's a great story. There's a really strange interview with Tom Cruise and Matt Lauer that took place about, 6 or 7 years ago, where Tom talked about how whenever I pass by a car accident, it's my responsibility as a Scientologist to stop because I know that I'm the only one that can actually help them. Yeah. Now, this is defended by other Scientologists. And what they would say is that there are a variety of issues that may have led you to the car accident to begin with. You may be around what's called an NP. We'll talk about this when we get to Scientology. We will, interestingly enough, not live stream that message. So for those of you online, I'm really sorry. There's a reason for why we will not live stream that message. And ask me about it sometime. I'm not going to do it here. But they believe that there are a variety of things that you may be attracting in your life because of a lack of ethics that have led you to this car accident. So in other words, bad things that happen to you is your fault because of the way you've been living your life, or because you're attached to someone who is bringing chaos into your life. Or if you're an upper-level Scientologist, you believe in thetans, which are these sort of weird, clingy, confused spirits that are on you and cling to you that you don't really realize until you're like one of the upper-level Scientologists, and they could also be attracting. So what Tom is saying is, I recognize I'm the only one that can help them because while a doctor may be able to bandage them up, I can get to the root of the problem for why they got in the car accident to begin with. Never mind the fact that people are just not perfect drivers and sometimes do dumb things while they're driving. But, alas, maybe a topic for another time. Number 4, a group will be seen as normal if they allow their kids to go to public school. Seems pretty pretty straightforward to me, but again, there is a place on the United States map. It is the border of two cities, Hilldale, Utah, and Colorado City, Arizona, which is always a little weird to me. This is where the headquarters for the Fundamentalist Latter-day Saints is located, the FLDS Church, where Warren Jeffs is still the living prophet, although he is in prison. This border city, or these border cities, are incredibly hostile to non-FLDS members. In fact, there have been many shootings and murders of people traveling through these cities because they are not FLDS and posed a threat to what they were doing there. Their sheriffs have been historically FLDS members. Their city government, FLDS members, so there's no real way of combating this. There's actually a documentary called Escaping Polygamy that highlights these areas. This is the spot on the map where this is taking place in the United States. There is a group called the Lost Boys that come out of these two cities. The Lost Boys are children, boys, born into FLDS families who are, the way this works is it's better to have little girls than little boys because little girls can be married off to the living prophet. Warren Jeffs had somewhere around 30 wives, I think, before he was imprisoned. He had 40 rooms in this massive house that he lived in, and most of them were very much under the age of what a young girl should be before she's married. If you have a boy, unless he's like a special prophet or a special person to the prophet, then they're basically they're useless. They're a waste. And so what parents will do in these cities is when they're old enough, meaning like mid-young teenagers, they will drive them into the desert in either Hilldale or Colorado City and abandon them. They go into orphans, and your reaction is justified. It's horrible. There's a great story here, though. There was a lost boy by the name of Brian Mackert. Brian Mackert came out of a fundamentalist home. He was dropped in the desert. He went into an orphanage. He bounced around. He began to question faith entirely, obviously abandoned his FLDS teachings, was eventually radically saved, and became a SBC, Southern Baptist missionary. Brian Mackert, at this time, wanted to minister to other families coming out of the FLDS movement. At the time, Warren Jeffs had a deal worked out with both the Arizona state government and the Utah state government to take in food rations that then he would then distribute to each of these cities because they were primarily FLDS members and they were extremely poor, very, very impoverished. So he was getting food rations from the government to feed the people in these cities. But Jeffs, being the scumbag that he is, was just taking them to farmers markets and selling them to make profit. So as people are starving, he's making money. The governments figure this stuff out. The whole thing comes down on him, and he loses the ability to take food from these governments. So Brian Mackert comes in, builds a massive storehouse right on the border of these two cities, works a deal out with both the state governments and says, hey, I'm a Southern Baptist missionary. I will keep records. I will have full transparency, full access to anything I'm doing at all times. You give me the food. I will make sure it gets to the people living in these cities. So they agree. Southern Baptist missionary, former lost boy, in his own city, feeding these people who are being deceived by the living prophet. But it gets better. Warren Jeffs gets arrested. He's imprisoned. So Brian Mackert takes money from the Southern Baptist Cooperative Fund, along with about 4 or 5 other churches that had been supporting him. He buys Warren Jeffs' 40-bedroom house and transforms it into a halfway house for lost boys who are coming out of this movement, shelters them, trains them, and sends them out into the world. Yeah, you can actually, as a minister, go and stay there overnight, which is admittedly a little creepy, and learn over a weekend how to do ministry to people coming out of the FLDS movement. God is using this guy mightily. What an amazing, amazing story. Brian Mackert, look him up. That's a really cool one. Mackert. Brian Mackert. Last but not least, a group will be seen as normal if they have publicly accessible worship services. Publicly accessible worship services. Now, I provided for you a couple pictures on your handout because I thought this was interesting. But if you've ever passed by a Kingdom Hall, have you ever noticed what is oddly missing? Windows. It's just a big brick front, usually with bushes that cover the side and Kingdom Hall written on it. A lot of times in Spanish, because it's a very big thing in the Spanish-speaking world. LDS meeting houses, and I will call them meeting houses and not churches because they are not a church. The church is, it belongs to Jesus. But they're meeting houses or they're tabernacles or their temple in Salt Lake, very sparse with windows. Now, what does that do to someone when they're driving by? Like, what is going on in there? Yeah, they're hiding something. They must be doing something weird in there. There's something going on with these people. This is why a lot of churches have abandoned stained glass windows, because this kind of thing started happening where people were going, what's going on in that church? What are they doing in there? Can't ever see anything. It's pretty windows, but I can't see what's happening in there. How do we know they're not doing some weird stuff, swinging from the chandeliers and whatnot? Yeah, but this is, yeah, I understand. But no one is over here, okay? To be fair, I would love to uncover those eventually and open them up, because I think having the sunlight is great, but a topic for another day. We have plenty of windows in our church. You can see what's going on. These are the kinds of things that groups have to do in order to appear normal. If they fall into these categories, if they're able to do some of these things the right way, then suddenly people who have suspicion about what's going on in there, their sensitivity and their, defensiveness goes down a little bit. Because all of a sudden, they don't seem so strange. Yeah, you can see what they're doing in there. Their kids go to school with my kids at a public school, and that dad served in the military, and they're a nonprofit the government recognizes. What could be wrong with this group? See, it's easy if you're willing to lower the social capital a little bit to make your members appear a little bit normal. Now, next week, what we're going to do, because we are out of time, is we are going to come back and look at a couple of other factors that enable these groups to succeed in having some lasting, staying power, some practices that they may be engaged in, some things that are very defining of them, and maybe some groups that don't do these things well, and we'll look at how these pay off and how they don't pay off, how some groups are seen as like very weird, and some groups are more or less kind of normal in the day-to-day business. As I mentioned at the beginning, if you have questions at all, or if you have a group that you want me to look at and consider for this class to talk about, because you have friends or family member that are a part of it, then please either come talk to me or message me, and I will look into that, and we will come back next week at the same time at 6:45. God bless you all. We'll see you then. Thank you.